Winter, 1943. A cold Bavarian night. Snow crunches beneath the wheels of a German truck as it lurches through narrow mountain roads, its headlights cutting thin beams through falling flakes. The smell of damp wood and diesel fuel hangs in the frozen air. Inside the cargo bed, wrapped in blankets and strapped to wooden frames, are paintings worth more than entire cities. Vermeers, Rembrandts, Michelangelos. Behind these trucks, scattered across a burning continent, Allied officers are preparing to hunt down the greatest art theft in history. This is the story of the Monuments Men, the secret army that saved Europe's soul from Nazi destruction. 1933. Adolf Hitler rises to power in Germany with two obsessions: conquest and culture. He dreams of transforming his boyhood home of Linz, Austria, into the cultural capital of the world. At the center of this vision stands the Führermuseum, a colossal gallery that would house the finest art collection ever assembled, not through patronage or purchase, but through systematic theft. Hitler himself was a failed artist, rejected twice from the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna. That rejection never left him. The admissions committee told him his work showed technical ability but lacked soul, lacked feeling. Now, with absolute power, he would become the supreme arbiter of taste across an empire. He would decide what was beautiful, what was valuable, what deserved to exist. The Führermuseum would be his monument, proof that German culture stood above all others. The paintings, sculptures, and treasures inside would be stripped from the nations he conquered. He begins planning immediately. He hires architects to draft designs for a museum complex that would dwarf anything in Paris, London, or New York. The main gallery would stretch over 150 meters, topped with a massive dome visible from across the city. Inside, carefully curated rooms would display Renaissance masterpieces, Dutch Golden Age paintings, classical sculptures. Hitler himself reviews architectural models, suggesting changes, demanding grandeur. He imagines crowds walking through his museum, awestruck by German superiority. But first, he needs an empire to plunder. And by 1939, his armies are marching. September 1st, 1939. German tanks roll into Poland. The invasion takes 18 days. Behind the Wehrmacht comes another force, men in suits carrying notebooks and cameras. They are Kunsthistorikers, art historians turned looters. Their mission is simple: identify, catalogue, and confiscate every work of value. Museums, private homes, synagogues, nothing is off limits. Within weeks, trainloads of Polish art begin flowing westward into Germany. The crown treasury at Wawel Castle in Krakow is emptied. Medieval tapestries, royal regalia, ancient manuscripts, all packed into crates and shipped to Berlin. The National Museum in Warsaw loses thousands of paintings and sculptures. Private collections belonging to Polish aristocracy vanish overnight. Nazi officials arrive at estates with detailed inventories, as if they had been planning these thefts for months. Because they had. This is not random pillage. This is industrial-scale cultural erasure, planned with German efficiency and executed with ruthless precision. In January 1940, Hitler formalizes the system. He establishes the Einsatzstab Reichsleiter Rosenberg, known as the ERR, named after Nazi ideologue Alfred Rosenberg. Rosenberg is a Baltic German who shares Hitler's obsessions with racial purity and cultural hierarchy. The ERR becomes the most efficient art theft operation in human history. Its mandate: seize all Jewish-owned collections, all art deemed valuable to the Reich, all treasures that can fuel Hitler's vision. The ERR operates in every occupied territory: France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Poland, Austria, Czechoslovakia. Entire museums are emptied overnight. Private collections that took generations to assemble vanish in hours. The ERR establishes offices in Paris, Brussels, Amsterdam, and a dozen other cities. Each office employs art historians, appraisers, photographers, and shipping coordinators. They work with the meticulousness of accountants, documenting every seized item with photographs, descriptions, and estimated values. These are not mere looters stuffing bags with silverware. They are organized criminals, operating with state backing and unlimited resources. By 1943, the ERR has seized over 5 million cultural objects. 5 million. Let that number settle. Paintings, sculptures, rare books, tapestries, furniture, religious artifacts, ancient coins, medieval armor. The scale is almost incomprehensible. To move this volume, the Nazis commandeer trains, trucks, barges, anywhere large enough to transport the loot. They requisition castles, monasteries, salt mines anywhere secure enough to store it. Hermann Göring, Hitler's second-in-command, builds his own private collection of over 1,500 stolen masterpieces. He visits ERR warehouses like a shopper at a department store, selecting Rembrandts and Rubens for his country estate at Carinhall. But what drives this obsession? Why does Hitler care so much about paintings when he's waging the largest war in human history? Because art, to Hitler, is power. It's proof of cultural supremacy. By possessing Europe's masterpieces, he's claiming that German civilization is the rightful heir to all Western achievement. He's saying, Rome, Florence, Amsterdam, Paris, they created beauty, but we Germans are worthy to own it, to preserve it, to decide its fate. And there's something else. Hitler knows that by stripping nations of their cultural heritage, he's destroying their identity. A country without its art is a country without memory, without pride, without soul. The theft is not just about acquisition, it's about domination. But the true victims are not just the objects, they are the families torn apart by this theft. Paris, June 14, 1940. German forces occupy the city after French defences collapse. The Wehrmacht marches down the Champs, Élysée in a victory parade that Hitler watches on newsreels with visible satisfaction. Within days, ERR agents descend on the Rothschild family mansions scattered throughout Paris and the surrounding countryside. The Rothschilds, one of Europe's most prominent Jewish banking families, have collected art for 5 generations. Their homes hold works by Vermeer, Fragonard, Boucher, Watteau, Gainsborough. The Nazis strip every room. They take landscapes from dining room walls. They take portraits from bedrooms. They take sculptures from gardens. They take rare books from libraries. They even take furniture, Louis Quinze chairs, Rococo mirrors, Persian rugs. Over 5,000 objects are taken from the Rothschilds alone. Family heirlooms, wedding gifts, portraits of ancestors, all catalogued with cold efficiency and shipped to Germany. In some cases, the Nazis photograph empty rooms after the theft, as if documenting their triumph. The same fate befalls thousands of other Jewish families across occupied Europe. The Rosenbergs in Amsterdam lose their collection of Dutch masters. The Wildensteins, one of the most important art-dealing families in Europe, see their inventory seized from vaults in Paris. The Seligmans, the Schloss family, the WWIIs, all stripped of treasures their families spent lifetimes assembling. The Nazis call this Enttartung, purging degenerate elements. But behind the bureaucratic language lies a simple truth. They are erasing people's histories, stealing their memories, destroying proof that they ever existed. When you take a family's art collection, you're not just taking objects, you're taking their story. That painting over the fireplace was purchased by someone's grandfather in 1890. That sculpture was a wedding gift. That portrait shows someone's great-grandmother as a young woman. These objects anchor families to their past, connect generations, provide continuity. The Nazis understand this. That's why they take everything. And it's not just private homes. In Florence, the Nazis pressure Italian officials to hand over works from the Uffizi Gallery for safekeeping. In Amsterdam, they target the Stedelijk Museum and the Rijksmuseum. In Brussels, they raid the Royal Museums of Fine Arts. Curators who resist are arrested. Some disappear into concentration camps, never to return. Others watch helplessly as soldiers load Rembrandts onto trucks, knowing that objecting means death. One museum director in France tries to hide paintings by reporting them destroyed in a fire. The Nazis discover the deception, arrest him, and torture him until he reveals the hiding location, a chateau cellar in the Loire Valley. They take the paintings and send him to a labor camp. He survives the war but never speaks about what happened to him. By mid-1943, Hitler's dream museum is becoming a reality. Storage depots across Germany and Austria overflow with stolen masterpieces. Plans for the Führermuseum advance. Architects draft blueprints for individual galleries, each dedicated to a different school of art. Curators begin organizing exhibitions, writing catalogue entries, preparing for the grand opening Hitler envisions after Germany wins the war. But there's one problem Hitler hasn't accounted for. The Allies are coming, and they're bringing their own secret weapon. But here's what almost no one was asking in 1943. What happens to all this art when the war ends? The Allies are focused on winning battles, liberating cities, defeating Hitler's armies. Military planners sit in rooms in London and Washington, moving pins across maps, calculating tonnage and troop numbers and fuel supplies. Saving paintings seems trivial compared to saving lives. Most assume the art question will sort itself out after victory. Museums will reopen, paintings will go back where they belong, everything will be fine. But a small group of scholars and curators sees a different danger. They understand that in the chaos of war, centuries of human achievement could be destroyed in moments. Bombs don't distinguish between military targets and museums. Artillery shells don't respect cathedral walls. Tank commanders don't check whether a building holds a Giotto before shelling it. And desperate, retreating armies have been known to burn what they can't keep. History is full of examples. During the Napoleonic Wars, countless artworks were destroyed or looted. In the First World War, the Germans burned the library at Louvain, Belgium, destroying over 300,000 books and manuscripts, some dating to the Middle Ages. War is efficient at destroying culture, so these scholars begin asking uncomfortable questions. Who will protect the Sistine Chapel when Rome is liberated? What happens to the Louvre's collections hidden in French chateaux? How do you stop soldiers from looting ancient monasteries? How do you prevent air raids from destroying irreplaceable frescoes? And most urgently, how do you track down millions of stolen artworks hidden across an entire continent? The answer would require creating something that had never existed before, a military unit dedicated not to destruction, but to preservation, not to killing, but to saving, not to conquest, but to protection. But building that unit meant convincing generals that art was worth dying for, and in the middle of the bloodiest war in human history, that was not an easy argument to make. Washington, D.C., December 1942. A Harvard art history professor named Paul Sachs sits in a War Department office, making an audacious pitch to military planners who would rather be anywhere else. Sachs is 65 years old, grey-haired, soft-spoken, and utterly convinced he's right. He directs the Fog Art Museum and has trained a generation of American museum directors through his famous museum course at Harvard. Now he's proposing something unprecedented. Embed art experts directly into combat units. Give them military rank. Send them to the front lines. Task them with identifying, protecting, and recovering cultural treasures as the Allies advance across Europe. The generals are skeptical. One of them interrupts Sachs to point out that they're planning the largest amphibious invasion in history. They're coordinating millions of troops, thousands of ships, countless tons of supplies, air support, naval bombardment, logistics chains stretching across oceans. And this professor wants them to worry about paintings? Sachs doesn't flinch. He explains that if the Allies destroy Europe's cultural heritage in the process of liberating it, what exactly are they liberating? A continent stripped of everything that makes it worth fighting for? He reminds them that the Nazis are deliberately stealing and hiding art, that millions of objects have already vanished, that without a focused effort to protect and recover these treasures, they'll be lost forever. He argues that America has a responsibility not just to defeat Hitler, but to preserve the civilization he's trying to destroy. The generals are unmoved. One of them says flatly, "Professor, we're trying to win a war. We can worry about museums after we win." Sachs leaves the meeting discouraged. But he has an ally he hasn't played yet, Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower. Eisenhower is different from many career military men. He's a student of history. He reads widely. He understands that wars are not just fought for territory, they're fought for ideals, for values, for visions of how the world should be. And he grasps something that many of his colleagues don't. If the Allies destroy Europe's cultural heritage in the process of liberating it, they're committing a different kind of atrocity, not equivalent to the Holocaust, not comparable to Nazi war crimes, but a failure nonetheless, a failure to be better than the enemy they're fighting. In February 1943, Sachs meets with Eisenhower. The conversation is brief. Eisenhower listens, asks a few questions, then nods. "Do it," he says. "Set it up." In June 1943, Eisenhower formally approves the creation of the Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives section, the MFA&A. Its mission: safeguard cultural property in war zones and recover objects stolen by the Nazis. The unit is tiny, barely 345 officers for all of Europe. They have no combat training, no dedicated weapons, no specialized transport, no significant budget. Most are middle-aged academics, curators, architects, art historians, museum directors. They're given officer ranks, handed maps, and told to figure it out as they go. They become known, unofficially, as the Monuments Men. And in June 1944, they're about to get their first real test. June 6, 1944. Dawn breaks over the Normandy coast. Allied troops storm 5 beaches under heavy fire. The invasion is chaos landing, craft sinking, soldiers drowning, artillery screaming overhead. By nightfall, over 150,000 Allied troops are ashore, but casualties are staggering. Blood turns the surf red at Omaha Beach. Days later, George Stout arrives. He's 43 years old, a conservator from Harvard's Fogg Museum, an expert in preservation techniques, how to stabilize damaged frescoes, how to protect paintings from moisture and shock, how to handle fragile artifacts. Stout specializes in the unglamorous technical work that keeps art alive. He can tell you the chemical composition of paint layers, the proper humidity for storing parchment, the best method for consolidating flaking pigment. He's meticulous, patient, and utterly fearless. When MFA&A forms, Stout is one of the first to volunteer. He lands in Normandy in mid-June and immediately begins surveying damaged churches and chateaux. While battles rage miles away, Stout crawls through rubble with a notebook, documenting what's been lost and what can be saved. He photographs shattered stained glass windows. He examines collapsed stone vaults. He makes lists of damaged monuments and recommendations for emergency stabilization. The work is frustrating. Stout has no authority to stop military operations, no power to declare buildings off limits. He can only advise, suggest, plead. Sometimes commanders listen, often they don't. A tank commander needs to position artillery in a medieval church tower because it has a clear sight line. Stout explains that the tower is 500 years old, that it contains 13th century frescoes, that it's irreplaceable. The commander shrugs. "War is hell, sir. Take it up with Hitler." But Stout doesn't give up. He documents everything, knowing that even if he can't save a building now, his records will help with reconstruction later. He's thinking decades ahead, imagining a future when Europe rebuilds and needs to know what was lost. Then there's James Rorimer, 38 years old, a curator from the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. Rorimer is an expert in medieval art, fluent in French, and relentlessly ambitious. Before the war, he organized exhibitions, acquired masterpieces for the Met, published scholarly articles. He's comfortable in high society, skilled at negotiating with wealthy collectors, and unafraid of powerful people. Now he's in France, wearing an army uniform and chasing stolen art through occupied territory. Rorimer understands that finding Nazi loot requires detective work, tracking, train manifests, interviewing witnesses, following leads through dangerous zones. He develops a network of informants, including French resistance fighters who report Nazi movements. He's willing to bend rules, push boundaries, and take risks that make his superiors nervous. Rorimer has a particular talent for getting people to talk. He's charming, persuasive, and shrewd. When he interrogates a captured German officer, he doesn't threaten or intimidate. He offers cigarettes, speaks respectfully, appeals to the man's professionalism, and often the German talks, revealing locations of hidden depots or names of colleagues who know more. Dean Keller is 40 years old, an art professor from Yale, soft-spoken and deeply religious. Keller deploys to Italy in 1944 and is immediately confronted with catastrophic destruction. Italy's artistic heritage is suffering damage that makes Keller physically ill. Medieval towers collapse under shellfire. Renaissance frescoes are shredded by shrapnel. Ancient mosaics are pulverized by bombs. Keller writes anguished letters home to his wife, describing the losses in painful detail. He tells her about a church in Naples where a Caravaggio painting was damaged by an explosion, about a palazzo in Florence where looters stole bronze sculptures, about a monastery near Cassino reduced to rubble. But he never stops working. He photographs damage, coordinates repairs, catalogues losses with heartbreaking precision. He organizes Italian workers to clear rubble, salvage fragments, protect what remains. Keller is haunted by the question, what right does he have to decide what's worth saving? Who is he to say that this church matters more than that one, that this painting deserves protection while that sculpture is expendable? He carries the weight of these decisions every day, knowing that his choices or failures will echo through history. And then there's Rose Valland. She's not technically a monuments officer, but she becomes their most valuable asset, their secret weapon, their hidden advantage. Valland is a 45-year-old French art historian who works at the Jeux de Paume Museum in Paris during the Nazi occupation. The building sits in the Tuileries Garden, a modest museum that normally displays contemporary art. But the Nazis repurpose it. They turn the Jeux de Paume into a sorting centre for stolen art. Every day, trucks arrive loaded with confiscated paintings from Jewish families, from seized private collections, from raided galleries. Nazi officers and art historians sort through the loot, deciding what goes to Hitler's collection, what goes to Goering, what gets sold to Swiss dealers, what gets destroyed as degenerate. And every day, Rose Valland watches. She works as an attaché at the museum, a position that allows her to move through the building without attracting suspicion. The Nazis assume she's harmless, a middle-aged woman, quiet, unassuming, beneath notice. They don't know she speaks perfect German. They don't know she's memorizing everything she sees. Valland secretly records which paintings arrive, where they're sent, which trains carry them to Germany. She memorizes shipping manifests. She eavesdrops on German officers discussing depot locations. She notes names, dates, destinations. She keeps detailed records hidden in her apartment, knowing that discovery means death. For 4 years, Valland risks her life gathering this intelligence. She never carries weapons, never engages in sabotage, never does anything to draw attention. She simply watches, listens, and remembers. When Paris is liberated in August 1944, she approaches American officers and tells them she has information about stolen art. They're skeptical until she produces her records page after page of meticulous documentation, an intelligence treasure trove. James Rorimer meets with Valland and realizes immediately that she's given him the key to finding Nazi loot. Her records show shipping routes, depot locations, and quantities. Without Valland's documentation, thousands of stolen works would never be recovered. She becomes Rorimer's closest collaborator, guiding him through the maze of Nazi storage sites. These are the monument's men, not soldiers, but scholars, not warriors, but witnesses, and they're about to face challenges that no amount of academic training prepared them for. Italy. September 1943. The Allies invade southern Italy and begin fighting northward toward Rome. The campaign is brutal. German forces retreat slowly, contesting every river, every mountain pass, every village. The Italian landscape is a minefield of cultural treasures, literally. Florence, Pisa, Siena, Ravenna, every city contains irreplaceable monuments. Every village has churches filled with Renaissance paintings and Baroque sculptures. The MFA&A officers scramble to keep pace with advancing troops, trying to mark buildings as off-limits before artillery destroys them. In Florence, German engineers prepare to blow the city's ancient bridges as they retreat north. The Ponte Vecchio, built in 1345, is the oldest bridge across the Arno River, lined with shops and houses that have stood for 6 centuries. The Germans mine it with explosives, planning to collapse it into the river to delay Allied tanks. Monuments. Officers raced to negotiate with German commanders, arguing that destroying the bridge serves no military purpose, that it's a civilian structure with no strategic value. The negotiations are tense. German officers point out that bridges are legitimate military targets, that slowing Allied advances saves German lives, that heritage means nothing compared to tactical advantage. But one German commander, a career officer who toured Florence before the war, hesitates. He remembers walking across the Ponte Vecchio, admiring the architecture, buying a leather-bound journal from one of the shops. He issues an order: spare the bridge, but demolish buildings on both banks to fill the approaches with rubble. The Ponte Vecchio survives, but the neighborhoods surrounding it are destroyed. Medieval towers collapse. Renaissance palazzos are reduced to rubble. Dean Keller arrives after the Germans withdraw and walks through the destruction, photographing every damaged building, every collapsed facade, every lost fresco. He fills notebook after notebook with sketches and measurements, knowing this documentation is all that remains of what was destroyed. In Pisa, the situation is worse. The Campo Santo, a medieval cemetery adjacent to the famous Leaning Tower, contains some of the most important 14th-century frescoes in Italy. The walls are covered with biblical scenes painted by Benozzo Gozzoli and other masters, depicting the triumph of death, the Last Judgment, stories from Genesis. These frescoes took decades to complete and have been preserved for 600 years. On July 27, 1944, Allied artillery shells hit the Campo Santo. Witnesses report seeing the roof burst into flames, fire spreading rapidly through the ancient timber structure. The lead roof melts and drips onto the frescoes below. The heat is so intense that painted plaster begins to crack and peel. By the time the fire burns out hours later, most of the frescoes are destroyed. Dean Keller arrives weeks later and finds the cemetery still smouldering. He walks through the ruins, staring at blackened walls where masterpieces once glowed with colour. Fragments of plaster lie scattered across the floor, some still showing traces of paint, a hand, a face, a section of drapery. Keller organizes Italian workers to sift through the rubble, salvaging every fragment they can find. They fill crates with charred plaster and broken paint, knowing that most of these frescoes are lost forever but determined to save whatever remains. Keller sits in the ruins that night and writes a letter home. He tells his wife that he's witnessed something he can never unsee, that he carries the weight of these losses like physical pain, that he wakes every morning knowing more treasures will be destroyed before sunset. But he also writes that he won't stop, that every fragment saved matters, that even ruins deserve protection. This is the brutal calculus the monuments men face every day. How do you protect art in the middle of a war? How do you convince battle-hardened soldiers that a church is more important than a machine gun nest? How do you explain to a tank commander that the building he wants to shell contains a Giotto fresco worth more than his entire battalion's equipment? Sometimes they succeed, sometimes they fail, and sometimes they arrive too late, left to document ruins and imagine what was lost. But the closer the Allies get to Germany, the more urgent their mission becomes. Because the greatest concentration of stolen art isn't in France or Italy, it's hidden in the heart of the Third Reich, in castles and mines and tunnels, guarded by soldiers who have been ordered to destroy everything if Germany falls. If you're still here with us, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below to let us know you're watching, because your thoughts keep history alive. Would you risk your life to save a painting? What would you protect if everything around you was burning? What do you think drove these men and women to put themselves in danger for objects that can't save lives or win battles? And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit the bell so you don't miss the hidden stories we uncover every week. Now, let's get back to the most dangerous chapter of this story, because what comes next will test everything the monuments men believe about why culture matters. France, autumn 1944. Paris is liberated in August, and champagne flows through streets filled with celebrating crowds. American soldiers are kissed by French women. Resistance fighters emerge from hiding, wearing tricolour armbands. General Charles de Gaulle leads a victory parade down the Champs-Élysées. But for James Rorimer and Rose Valland, the celebration is brief. They have work to do. Valand hands Rorimer her record's 4 years of documentation, hundreds of pages detailing Nazi art shipments from Paris into Germany. The records are meticulous but cryptic. Nazi manifests refer to Storage Site A or Depot 12, never actual locations. They use code names for destinations: Stronghold, Eagle's Nest, Repository 7. Rorimer realizes he's hunting ghosts' artworks that vanish into a collapsing empire, hidden in castles, monasteries, mines, and tunnels that may or may not still exist. He begins interrogating captured German officers. Most claim ignorance, insisting they were just following orders, that they don't know where art was sent. Some lie, giving false information to waste Rorimer's time. A few, seeing the war is lost, cooperate sometimes for cigarettes, sometimes for better treatment, sometimes because they're horrified by what they participated in and want to make amends. One German officer, a former museum curator drafted into ERR service, tells Rorimer that Hitler ordered decentralization of stolen collections as Allied bombing intensified. Instead of keeping everything in Berlin or Munich, where air raids could destroy it, the Nazis scattered treasures across hundreds of remote locations: Alpine castles, medieval monasteries, underground salt mines. Each depot is camouflaged, guarded, and deliberately isolated. The logic was sound. If one depot is discovered or destroyed, the others remain safe. But this strategy creates a problem for recovery. Instead of searching a few large repositories, the monument's men must find hundreds of small ones scattered across a continent. It's like hunting for needles in a haystack the size of Europe. Rorimer and other MFA&A officers interview French and Belgian civilians who witnessed Nazi convoys. They study railway records captured from German offices. They cross-reference shipping manifests with personnel rosters, trying to identify which officers oversaw which depots. Slowly, painstakingly, a map emerges, a network of hidden storage sites stretching from France to Austria. But what they don't yet know is that Hitler has issued a final apocalyptic order that threatens to destroy everything they're trying to save. March 19, 1945. Allied forces cross the Rhine River and drive deep into Germany. The end is near. Everyone knows it. German cities are in ruins from Allied bombing. The Wehrmacht is collapsing. Soviet forces are advancing from the east, American and British forces from the west. Hitler's empire is dying. In his bunker beneath Berlin, Hitler issues a series of orders collectively known as the Nero Decree, named after the Roman emperor who supposedly burned his own city. The decree states that all infrastructure, all resources, all treasures must be destroyed rather than captured by the Allies. If Germany cannot win, then Germany must burn. Bridges, factories, power plants, dams, demolish them all. Leave the Allies nothing but ruins. And the decree includes cultural property. If Germany's art cannot belong to the Reich, it should belong to no one. Museums, repositories, storage depots rig them with explosives. When Allied forces approach, blow everything to pieces. Hitler's logic is twisted but consistent with his worldview. He believes Germany has failed him, that the German people proved unworthy of his vision, that they deserve destruction. If they cannot build the 1,000-year Reich, they deserve nothing. The art he spent years stealing, the treasures he planned for his Führermuseum, the cultural heritage he claimed to revere, all of it should be annihilated. Some Nazi officials begin rigging art depots with explosives. They stack bomb crates in mine tunnels. They wire detonators in castle cellars. They prepare to carry out Hitler's final act of nihilistic destruction. Others, horrified, quietly ignore the orders. They remove detonators secretly. They hide key components. They sabotage their own preparations, hoping to delay long enough for the Allies to arrive. The MFA&A officers don't learn about the Nero Decree until weeks later, when captured documents are translated and circulated. When they finally understand what they're racing against, the urgency becomes almost unbearable. Every day they delay, more treasures disappear or are destroyed. Some are demolished by fanatical SS troops who follow Hitler's orders to the letter. Some are hidden by desperate curators trying to protect them from both sides. Some are looted by retreating soldiers who see a last chance for profit. The race is on, and what the monuments men are about to discover in the mountains of Austria will exceed their most optimistic hopes and their worst fears. April 1945. American forces advance into the Austrian Alps, a region of steep valleys, snow-covered peaks, and villages that seem frozen in medieval time. The resistance here is sporadic small groups of German soldiers making last stands before surrendering or melting into the mountains. Near the village of Altaussee, soldiers notice something strange: heavy truck traffic in and out of a mountain tunnel, even though there's no town or military installation nearby. Locals are evasive when questioned, claiming the tunnel leads to an old salt mine that's been closed for months, but the soldiers don't believe them. They investigate and find the entrance to a massive salt mine that has been operating for over 1,000 years, carving tunnels deep into the mountain. The mine produces high-quality salt used for preserving food and tanning leather. But it hasn't been mining salt recently. It's been storing art. George Stout and a team of MFA&A officers arrive at Altaussee on May 8, 1945, the day Germany surrenders. Victory in Europe Day. Across the continent, people celebrate in streets, dancing and drinking and crying with relief. But Stout isn't celebrating yet. He's standing at the mouth of a tunnel, holding a flashlight, preparing to descend into darkness. The mine entrance is reinforced with timber beams. Electric lights have been installed, wired to a generator that's still running. As Stout descends, the air grows colder and drier. Salt crystals glitter on the walls, catching the light like diamonds. The main tunnel branches into dozens of side passages, some natural cavern formations, some carved by centuries of miners. Stout follows markings on the wall's Nazi codes, indicating which chambers hold which categories of objects. He turns a corner and stops. Before him stretches an underground cathedral of stolen masterpieces, painting after painting after painting, stacked floor to ceiling against the walls. Crates marked with swastikas and shipping codes, works by Rembrandt, Vermeer, Michelangelo, Raphael, Jan van Eyck, Leonardo da Vinci. Treasures taken from the Louvre, the Uffizi, the Rijksmuseum, private collections across Europe. The officers move through chamber after chamber in stunned silence. There are over 6,500 paintings here, 137 transport crates, sculptures wrapped in protective cloth, tapestries rolled and stored in wooden cases, medieval altarpieces carefully packed in custom crates. The scale is overwhelming. Stout has spent his entire career around art, but he's never seen anything like this. It's as if someone emptied half the museums of Europe into a single mountain. The mine's cold, dry environment has preserved everything perfectly. No moisture damage, no mold, no fading. These treasures have been safer here than they would have been in any museum during the bombing campaigns. In one chamber, covered with a protective cloth, they find Michelangelo's Madonna of Bruges, a marble sculpture of the Virgin Mary, holding the infant Jesus, carved by Michelangelo in 1501. The sculpture was stolen from the Church of Our Lady in Bruges, Belgium, packed carefully by Nazi curators, and shipped here for safekeeping. It's one of only a handful of Michelangelo sculptures outside Italy, and it's been sitting in an Austrian salt mine for over a year. But as the monuments men catalogue the treasures, working by flashlight in the cold tunnels, they discover something that makes their blood run cold. The mine is wired with explosives. They find detonators first, tucked into niches in the salt walls, then wiring, running along the ceiling of several main tunnels, then stacks of bomb crates, heavy wooden boxes marked with warnings in German. Stout calls for an explosives expert from the Corps of Engineers. The expert examines the setup and delivers grim news. There's enough explosive material here to collapse miles of tunnels, burying everything under thousands of tons of rock. It's not immediately clear whether the explosives were placed to destroy the art or simply to seal the mine tunnels in case of attack. The monuments men begin interrogating mine workers and captured German officers, trying to understand what was planned and whether the danger has passed. The answers they get are fragmentary and contradictory, but slowly the truth emerges. A local Nazi official named August I. Gruber, Gauleiter of Upper Austria, and a fanatical Hitler loyalist, ordered the mine destroyed in accordance with the Nero decree. I. Gruber was a true believer, one of those Nazi officials who followed orders without question or conscience. When Hitler said destroy everything, I. Gruber took it literally. He wanted to bury the treasures forever, ensuring that if the Reich fell, no one else would possess them. Better to annihilate masterpieces than allow enemy nations to reclaim what Germany had rightfully conquered. I. Gruber arranged for 8 500-kilogram bombs to be delivered to Altaussee in early April 1945. These were massive aerial bombs, each weighing over half a ton, designed to destroy entire buildings. He ordered them placed at key structural points in the mine spots, where detonation would trigger catastrophic collapse. The plan was to wait until Allied forces approached, then blow the charges, entombing Europe's artistic heritage in salt and stone. But other people had different ideas. Some Nazi officials stationed at Altaussee were art lovers who couldn't bear to see masterpieces destroyed. Others were pragmatists who knew the war was lost and wanted something left to bargain with when the Allies arrived. A few were simply decent human beings who understood they were being asked to commit an unforgivable atrocity. These resistors worked in secret. They removed detonators from bomb crates. They cut wiring and reconnected it to make it look intact. They hid key blasting components. They sabotaged I. Gruber's plan piece by piece, taking enormous personal risks. If I. Gruber discovered the sabotage, he would have had them shot immediately. Local miners also helped. They were Austrians, not Germans, and many resented Nazi occupation. When ordered to help place explosives, they deliberately positioned some bombs incorrectly in locations where detonation would cause minimal structural damage. They forgot to connect certain wiring runs. They worked slowly, hoping to delay long enough for the Allies to arrive. The resistance came to a head in early May. I. Gruber discovered that his orders weren't being followed properly and flew into a rage. He threatened to execute anyone who interfered with the destruction. But by then, it was too late. Allied forces were approaching. On May 4th, a group of Austrian miners and low-level Nazi officials forcibly prevented I. Gruber from entering the mine. There was a brief standoff, weapons drawn, but I. Gruber backed down. Days later, American troops arrived and arrested him. The Monuments men realized they've witnessed a near miracle. If I. Gruber's orders had been fully executed, the explosion would have been catastrophic. The concussive force would have collapsed miles of tunnels, burying centuries of art under impossible tonnage. The loss would have been incalculable, not just in monetary value, but in human memory, in cultural continuity, in the very fabric of European identity. Entire artistic movements would have been erased. The Dutch Golden Age would have lost dozens of defining masterpieces. Renaissance painting would have suffered irreparable gaps. Families would never recover ancestral portraits. Museums would lose the works that anchored entire collections. Scholars would lose the objects they studied for lifetimes. But it didn't happen. The art survived. And now the Monuments men face the monumental task of cataloguing, securing, and eventually returning everything they've found. May 1945. While Stout's team works at Altaussee, other MFA&A officers fan out across southern Germany, following leads from captured documents and interrogated prisoners. One team, led by James Rorimer, discovers Neuschwanstein Castle, King Ludwig's fairy tale fortress, perched on a Bavarian mountaintop. The castle, built in the 1870s, is famous for its romantic architecture, inspired by Wagner's operas and medieval legend. Walt Disney would later use it as the model for Sleeping Beauty's castle. But the Nazis have repurposed it as a central repository for stolen art. Not paintings this time, but something more personal. The household possessions of Europe's wealthiest Jewish families. Rorimer leads his team through the castle's ornate rooms and finds them stacked floor to ceiling with furniture, silverware, rugs, china, jewelry, books, musical instruments, clothing, everything that makes a house a home. Dining tables from Paris salons, grandfather clocks from Amsterdam townhouses, silver candelabras from Brussels estates, Persian rugs from Vienna apartments, crystal chandeliers from Prague mansions. The Nazis catalogued everything meticulously, planning to auction or redistribute the items after the war. Walking through Neuschwanstein is different from walking through Altaussee. At Altaussee, you see masterpieces, objects that belong in museums, that were created for public display, that exist somewhat apart from individual lives. But at Neuschwanstein, you see intimacy. You see the chairs people sat in for dinner. You see the beds they slept in. You see their children's toys, their wedding china, their grandmother's jewelry boxes. Rorimer walks through room after room, overwhelmed by the human scale of the theft. He finds a crate filled with family photo albums, taken from a Jewish family in Amsterdam, page after page of birthday parties, weddings, holiday gatherings, smiling faces, children, grandparents, all dead now, murdered in camps, and their memories stolen along with their lives. In another room, he finds musical instruments, violins, cellos, a grand piano. Each instrument has a tag, indicating which family it was taken from, which city, which date. Some tags include notes, fine condition, significant value, or requires repair. The Nazis treated these instruments like inventory in a warehouse, assigning them monetary value, stripping them of the hands that played them, the homes where they made music, the lives they accompanied. The scale is overwhelming. There are tens of thousands of objects at Neuschwanstein alone, and it's just one of over 1,000 Nazi storage depots scattered across Germany and Austria. The MFA&A has barely a few dozen officers to process all this. They photograph what they can, they catalogue what they can, they secure the most valuable items, they set up guard posts and warn soldiers not to loot, but some soldiers ignore the warnings. Paintings disappear from castles overnight. Small sculptures go missing from storage rooms. Silver candlesticks vanish from crates. Rorimer and his colleagues are furious, but they're nearly powerless. The military police have bigger concerns than tracking stolen silverware. They're managing millions of displaced persons, processing prisoners of war, maintaining order in occupied territory. A missing painting doesn't make the priority list. The monument's men realize they face a problem they hadn't fully anticipated: restitution. Returning stolen art to its rightful owners will require identifying every item, tracing its provenance, and locating surviving family members or their heirs. For objects taken from museums, this is relatively straightforward. Institutions keep good records, and most museums survived the war. But for objects taken from Jewish families, restitution is almost impossible. Why? Because entire families were exterminated. The Rosenbergs of Amsterdam had a magnificent art collection, but if all the Rosenbergs are dead, who inherits? Do you search for distant cousins who emigrated before the war? Do you give the art to the Dutch government? Do you leave it in storage until someone can prove ownership? And what about items that have no clear provenance? A painting with no signature, no documentation, no label indicating origin. A sculpture that could have come from any of a dozen collections. A piece of furniture that might have belonged to someone important or might have been ordinary household goods. These questions haunt the monument's men as they work through the depots. They understand that recovery is only the beginning. The truly difficult work, the work of healing, of justice, of making things right, will take decades. Maybe longer. Maybe forever. And yet, the most dangerous part of this story was still to come. Because what followed didn't just change how art was recovered, it changed how the world understood justice, memory, and what we owe to the dead. The work of restitution would become one of the defining moral challenges of the post-war era, a test of whether civilization could be restored not just physically, but ethically. Summer 1945 through 1955. The war in Europe ends on May 8, 1945. But the monument's men's work continues for years. They establish collection points in Munich, Wiesbaden, Offenbach, and other German cities. These are massive warehouses where recovered artworks are brought, documented, and prepared for return. Every item must be photographed from multiple angles. Every item must be researched. Where did it come from? Who owned it? How was it stolen? What's its condition? The process is agonizingly slow. The MFA&A has limited staff, limited funding, and faces constant pressure from military commanders who want to demobilize and bring soldiers home. Many monuments officers returned to civilian life in late 1945 and early 1946, exhausted and eager to resume their interrupted careers. The officers who remain struggle with inadequate resources and mounting backlogs. George Stout works at the Munich collection point, processing items recovered from Altaussee and other Austrian depots. He establishes protocols for handling different types of objects. Paintings need climate control, sculptures need padding, tapestries need to be rolled correctly. He trains military personnel in basic conservation techniques, knowing that mishandling can cause irreparable damage. Some pieces are easy to identify. Major museum works have clear documentation, inventory numbers, catalogue entries, photographs in published books. When a Rembrandt from the Louvre arrives at the collection point, Stout can verify its identity quickly and mark it for return to France. When a Raphael from the Uffizi is recovered, he contacts Italian authorities and arranges transport. But many pieces are mysteries. A small Dutch landscape painting with no signature. Where did it come from? Could be any of a dozen private collections in Amsterdam. A medieval manuscript with no identifying marks. Was it stolen from a monastery, a university library, a private collector? An ornate jewelry box containing nothing but a faded photograph of a family. Who are these people? Are any of them alive? The MFA&A publishes lists of recovered works in newspapers and art journals. They circulate descriptions and photographs to museums, governments, and Jewish organizations. Slowly, claims begin arriving. Some are straightforward museums requesting state-owned pieces with clear provenance. Others are complicated individuals claiming objects based on family memory but lacking documentary proof. The French government is particularly aggressive in pursuing restitution. They send delegations to collection points, armed with inventories of looted works. Rose Valland, now working for the French government, uses her wartime records to identify French-owned pieces and coordinate their return. By 1949, thousands of artworks have been returned to France, including major masterpieces from the Louvre and Versailles. Belgium recovers the Ghent Altarpiece in September 1945. The massive polyptych by Jan van Eyck, painted in 1432, is one of the most significant works in Northern Renaissance art. Its return is celebrated across Europe as a symbol of cultural survival, proof that Hitler's attempt to erase European heritage failed. The Netherlands faces a more complex situation. Many Dutch Jewish families were completely annihilated in the Holocaust. Their art collections are recovered, but there's no one left to claim them. The Dutch government establishes a commission to handle these orphaned artworks, attempting to identify heirs, no matter how distant. In some cases, they find cousins who emigrated to America or South America before the war. In other cases, they find no one. Italy receives back thousands of pieces stolen from churches, museums, and private collections. Dean Keller personally supervises the return of some works, travelling with convoys to ensure safe transport. He writes reports documenting condition issues and recommending conservation treatments. Even after the war ends, even after he could go home, Keller stays in Italy, driven by a sense of obligation to the treasures he fought to protect. But not everything can be returned. Some works remain unclaimed pieces with no clear provenance, items stripped from families that no longer exist, objects that simply can't be matched to any known collection. These works become state property, held in trust for owners who may never materialize, and some treasures are never recovered at all. Estimates suggest that over 100,000 artworks stolen by the Nazis remain missing today. Some were destroyed in bombing raids or fires. Some were sold to neutral countries like Switzerland or Spain during the war and disappeared into private collections. Some were hidden by low-level Nazi officials who hoped to profit after the war. Some simply vanished in the chaos of defeat, taken by looters, buried in forgotten depots, lost to history. The monuments men save millions of objects, but they can't save everything. That failure haunts them. This work costs more than time and effort. It costs lives. Not many, the monuments men, are not frontline combat troops, but enough to remind us that nothing in war is truly safe, that every mission carries risk, that good intentions don't guarantee survival. In March 1945, Captain Walter Huchthausen, an MFA&A officer working in Germany, is killed by artillery fire while surveying a damaged church near the Rhine. He's 31 years old, a museum curator from Wisconsin, and he dies trying to determine whether the church's 15th-century altarpiece can be salvaged. His death is listed as killed in action, even though he never fired a shot, never commanded troops, never participated in combat. He died because he believed a wooden altarpiece mattered enough to risk approaching an active battle zone. In January 1945, Major Ronald Balfour, a British monuments officer, dies when his jeep strikes a landmine in the Netherlands. He's 39 years old, a scholar of medieval history from Cambridge University. Balfour was driving to inspect a monastery that reportedly held hidden artworks. The mine explosion kills him instantly. His colleagues find his notes in the wreckage, careful observations about damaged buildings, recommendations for repairs, sketches of architectural details. These men don't die storming beaches or charging bunkers. They die doing what many soldiers told them was pointless, trying to save buildings and paintings while cities burned and men bled. Their deaths raise uncomfortable questions. Was it worth it? Does a painting justify a human life? Can you measure the value of culture against the value of survival? The monuments men themselves struggle with these questions. George Stout returns home to the United States in 1945, exhausted and haunted. He spent 2 years crawling through rubble, documenting losses, cataloguing horrors. He's seen art destroyed by bombs, looted by soldiers, abandoned to decay. He's witnessed the systematic erasure of Jewish culture, the theft of entire communities' memories. He never fully recovers from what he witnessed. Stout takes a position at the Worcester Art Museum in Massachusetts, then later becomes Director of Conservation at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. He continues working with art for the rest of his career, but colleagues notice he's changed. He's quieter, more serious, haunted by something he won't discuss. He rarely talks about his war experiences, even when asked. The weight of what he saw, what he couldn't save, never leaves him. James Rorimer returns to the Metropolitan Museum in New York and eventually becomes its director in 1955. He builds the Met into one of the world's greatest museums, acquiring masterpieces and expanding collections. But he's forever changed by what he saw in Neuschwanstein rooms, filled with the belongings of murdered families, treasures stripped from people who had already lost everything. Rorimer becomes obsessed with provenance research, insisting that the Met thoroughly investigate the history of every acquisition. He refuses to purchase any work with questionable wartime history, even when offered pieces at bargain prices. Rose Valland continues working for the French government, tracking looted art and coordinating restitutions. She travels across Europe, following leads, interviewing witnesses, building cases. She's relentless, driven by memories of watching Nazi officers sort through stolen paintings at the Jeu de Paume. In 1961, she publishes a memoir, Le Front de l'Art, documenting her wartime experiences. The book becomes an important historical source, but brings her little recognition. She remains largely unknown outside specialist circles, her heroism acknowledged by scholars but overlooked by popular history. Dean Keller returns to Yale and resumes teaching art history. But he continues traveling to Italy for decades, monitoring restoration projects, advising on conservation treatments, maintaining relationships with Italian colleagues. Italy awards him medals for his wartime service. Museums name galleries in his honor. But Keller remains humble, insisting he was just doing what needed to be done, that the real heroes were the Italian workers who cleared rubble and salvaged fragments while bombs still fell. Today, you can walk into the Louvre and see the Mona Lisa hanging in climate-controlled security, admired by millions each year. You can visit Florence and stand beneath Brunelleschi's Duomo, one of the greatest architectural achievements of the Renaissance. You can enter the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam and marvel at Rembrandt's Night Watch, a painting so iconic it defines an era. You can visit the Church of Our Lady in Bruges and see Michelangelo's Madonna, returned to its home after being rescued from an Austrian salt mine. You can do these things because of the monuments men. Without them, much of Europe's cultural heritage would have been destroyed, bombed by allies who didn't know better, burned by Nazis who wanted to erase the world, looted by soldiers looking for souvenirs, abandoned to decay in forgotten depots. The monuments men established principles that still guide us today, that shape how we think about war, culture, and responsibility. During the Gulf War in 1991, coalition forces consulted with archaeologists to identify protected sites in Iraq. During the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq in the 2000s, military units included cultural heritage advisors, modern monuments, men who tried to protect ancient sites from damage. These advisors carried maps marking mosques, museums, archaeological sites, libraries. They briefed commanders on the historical significance of certain buildings. They investigated damage reports and coordinated with local authorities. After the looting of the Baghdad Museum in 2003, when thousands of artifacts were stolen in the chaos following the American invasion, investigators used techniques pioneered by the MFA&A to track stolen objects. They published inventories online, contacted international dealers, worked with customs officials to intercept smuggled antiquities. The effort recovered thousands of pieces, though thousands more remain missing. When ISIS began destroying cultural heritage sites in Syria and Iraq, blowing up temples in Palmyra, bulldozing ancient Assyrian cities, looting museums and archaeological sites, archaeologists around the world documented the losses using methods George Stout developed in 1944. They created detailed records of what existed before destruction, knowing that someday, perhaps, reconstruction might be possible. They understood that memory matters, that documentation is a form of preservation, that bearing witness is sometimes all you can do. The monuments men also changed how we think about restitution and justice. Their work sparked decades of legal and ethical debates about returning stolen art, debates that continue today. Museums routinely research the provenance of their collections now, checking whether pieces were looted during the Nazi era. When questionable provenance is discovered, institutions face difficult decisions. Do you return a painting purchased in good faith decades ago? Do you compensate heirs of original owners? What if the original owners are all dead and heirs can't be definitively established? These questions don't have easy answers. In 2017, the Dutch government returned a painting by the 17th-century artist Jan van Goyen to the heirs of a Jewish art dealer murdered in the Holocaust. The painting had hung in a Dutch museum for decades, acquired after the war with no knowledge of its Nazi-looted history. The return was celebrated as an act of justice, but it also raised questions. How many other works in museum collections have similar histories? How far back should provenance research go? Is it enough to say, "We didn't know," when ignorance facilitated injustice? Families still seek works stolen from their grandparents and great-grandparents. In 2018, the heirs of a Jewish collector in Vienna successfully reclaimed a painting by Gustav Klimt that had been seized by the Nazis and ended up in an Austrian museum. The legal battle took years and raised thorny questions about statute of limitations, good faith acquisition, and the obligations of institutions to rectify historical wrongs. Governments still negotiate returns. In 2019, France agreed to return artworks looted from Africa during the colonial era, acknowledging that some forms of cultural theft extend beyond the Nazi period, that questions of justice and restitution apply to many contexts. The legal framework for protecting cultural property in wartime, established by the Hague Convention of 1954, was directly influenced by the MFA&A's experiences. The convention declares that cultural property must be protected during armed conflict, that deliberate destruction constitutes a war crime, that occupying powers have obligations to preserve heritage. These principles are now enshrined in international law, though enforcement remains challenging. But perhaps most importantly, the monuments men proved something many people doubted in 1943. Art is worth fighting for. Not because paintings are more important than people they're not, they never are, but because art is part of what makes us human, its memory made visible, its beauty preserved across time, its proof that we are more than just survival machines, that we create things for no reason except that they speak to us, move us, connect us to something larger than ourselves. Hitler understood this, which is why he wanted to steal Europe's art. He wanted to rewrite history, to claim that German culture was supreme, to erase everyone else's contributions, to demonstrate that might determines who controls memory. The Monuments Men stopped him. They didn't do it with tanks or bombs or superior firepower. They did it with notebooks, cameras, and stubborn determination. They proved that civilization is stronger than conquest, that memory outlasts empires, that some things are worth risking everything to save. August 1946. The war has been over for more than a year. George Stout stands in a collection point in Munich, surrounded by crates of paintings waiting to be returned to their homes. He's 45 years old but looks older, worn down by years of work, haunted by losses he couldn't prevent. Around him, workers carefully pack a Vermeer for transport to Amsterdam, wrap a Raphael for shipment to Florence, crate a medieval altarpiece destined for a church in Belgium. Stout allows himself a moment of reflection. The paintings in this room, paintings that Hitler wanted destroyed or locked away forever, paintings that represented the culmination of the greatest art theft in history, will return home. They'll hang in museums again, they'll be seen by millions of people over generations. Children will stand before them in wonder. Scholars will study them for centuries. They survived, but Stout also thinks about what didn't survive: the frescoes at Pisa, destroyed by fire, the paintings lost in bombings, the objects that vanished and will never be found, the families who created collections over generations, only to have everything stolen and themselves murdered. The Monuments Men saved millions of objects, but they couldn't save the people who loved them, the communities that created the context for art to matter. He thinks about his colleagues: Rorimer back in New York, building a museum; Keller still in Italy, monitoring restorations; Valand in Paris, continuing the hunt for missing works, all of them changed by what they witnessed, marked by losses they couldn't prevent, driven by a sense that the work is never really finished. Stout picks up a photograph from his desk. It shows the interior of Altaussee salt mine, paintings stacked along the walls, Michelangelo's Madonna covered with protective cloth. He remembers descending into that mine on Victory Day, the cold air, the salt crystals glittering like stars, the overwhelming sense of walking through history itself. He remembers finding the explosives, learning how close they came to losing everything, understanding that sometimes civilization survives by the thinnest margins. He thinks about the question that haunted him throughout the war and still haunts him now. Was it worth it? Every risky trip through battle zones, every hour spent cataloguing instead of sleeping, every moment wondering if the effort mattered when people were dying by the millions. And standing here, in a room full of rescued masterpieces, preparing them for return to the world, Stout knows the answer. Yes. Not because art is more valuable than human life, but because these objects represent something essential about who we are as a species. They're evidence that humans, despite all our capacity for destruction and cruelty, also create beauty, that we make things not for utility or survival, but because we're driven to express what we see, feel, and imagine, that we preserve these creations across centuries, passing them from generation to generation, building a continuity of culture that connects us to our ancestors and to our descendants. Hitler wanted to break that continuity. He wanted to claim it for himself, to erase everyone else's contributions, to make culture serve ideology. The Monuments Men refused to let that happen. They proved that some things transcend war, that beauty doesn't belong to conquerors, that civilization's memory is stronger than any tyrant's will. That's the story of the Monuments Men, a secret army that fought without weapons, a mission that saved millions of objects, and a legacy that reminds us why culture matters. They proved that art is not a luxury, not an afterthought, not something to worry about after more important things are handled. It's the record of our highest aspirations, our deepest feelings, our shared humanity, and it's worth saving, no matter the cost. Thank you for joining us today. Before you go, tell me in the comments, what's the most surprising detail you learned from this story? Did you know about the Nero Decree and how close we came to losing Altaussee's treasures? Had you heard of Rose Valand and her 4 years of secret documentation? What would you risk to save if everything around you was burning? Your insights make this community stronger, and I read every single comment. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss the hidden histories we uncover every week. Until next time, remember some things are worth saving, no matter the cost. We'll see you in the next video.